On today's podcast, we sit down with Keith Jopling, author, music industry strategist, and host of the Art of Longevity podcast. Keith has just released his new book, Body of Work, How the Album Outplayed the Algorithm and Survived Playlist Culture. We explore why the album remains the ultimate artistic statement in the digital age, how artists like Taylor Swift and Charlie XCX are shaping the future of the format, and why art can truly buck the market. We'll discuss the album's incredible resilience from the Napster era to the Spotify shuffle to the cultural power that playlists and singles can never replicate, and what it takes for artists to build a legacy in today's industry. If you care about the future of music, this is an episode you can't afford to miss. Insiders, are you ready?
Welcome to MUBUTV's Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we're thrilled to welcome influential music industry analyst, author, and podcast host, Keith Jopling. We dive into Keith's fascinating new book, Body of Work, an alternative history of the album, exploring how the album has defied technological deaths and remained the ultimate artistic statement in the digital age. You'll hear why artists and fans continue to champion the album's format even in an era of playlists, algorithms, and instant gratification, and what the vinyl resurgence means for music culture today. We discuss the critical role of albums in defining legacy and identity for artists, how platform economics have both threatened and revived the album, and why the slower pace of artistic discovery still matters in our fast-moving world. Keith also reveals insights from his Art of Longevity podcast, shares inspiration for up-and-coming creators, and provides practical wisdom for future industry professionals committed to building meaningful careers in music. This is one episode you don't want to miss. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey Insiders, ready to crush it in the music world? Whether you're an artist, band, or future music biz pro, MUBUTV's personalized coaching is your secret weapon.
We'll work with you side by side, sharpening your songs, building your brand story, locking in your ideal audience, and powering up your social media game.
Starting fresh or ready for the next level, we cover everything. Live shows, marketing hacks, branding, all tailored just for you.
Flexible coaching packages let you decide what fits your time and budget. Single sessions or discounted bundles that make investing easy.
Imagine the boost after just one session. Clearer goals, smarter strategies, and unstoppable confidence. Get started with a free 15-minute discovery call at book.mubutv.com. That's book.mubutv.com. Let's make your music career unstoppable. Hey Insiders, are you ready to take serious control of your music career? Whether you're dreaming of getting signed, finding the perfect artist manager, or landing your music in movies and TV shows, MUBUTV has you covered with 3 essential free guides.
First, learn how to contact A&R the right way. The insider secrets to approaching executives without burning bridges and with confidence.
Next, discover how to attract the right artist manager, when to start looking, what to expect, and how to find someone who truly believes in your vision.
And finally, unlock the world of sync licensing with how to pitch to music supervisors the right way. Get your music placed in film and TV, reach new audiences, and open up exciting revenue streams.
These guides are packed with real-world advice, practical steps, and the do's and don'ts every artist needs.
If you're listening on this podcast or watching on YouTube, just check the description below to download your free copies now. This is your blueprint for turning dreams into reality. Don't miss out.
Ritch, it's that time of year again. Muse Expo 2026 is just around the corner.
Yeah, and it's the 26th year.
I can't believe that.
I know. It's absolutely, I mean,
you've been to all of them almost. I think you've been to all of them.
Every single one from the time he started it in the year 2000.
Unbelievable.
At the Bellage Hotel. That's what it was called back then on Sunset and San Vicente. Yeah, he began it 26 years ago. This is the 26th year for Muse Expo. It's one of the great, it's called the United Nations of music conferences. And it's really an incredible event that's going to be taking place, I believe, on March 22nd
through the 25th.
Through the 25th.
And it's going to be at the Castaways in Burbank, which is a beautiful location for anybody that hasn't been there or seen it. It's a beautiful kind of overlook of all of the downtown Burbank.
Absolutely. And there's going to be some incredible people there. The entire music team of Netflix, all of their top music executives are going to be there.
Also Marvel.
Exactly. The music supervision team behind all of the Marvel movies is going to be there en masse, all of them together, talking about the work on the Marvel films. I mean, this is a really great opportunity. There's going to be A&R executives. We're going to be having people like Chase Butters, who's the head and vice president of Sync for Concord. We've got people like Dave Jordan, who we had mentioned earlier is the founder and CEO of Format, who does all of the Marvel films.
And we're going to be there, so that'll be a great opportunity for anybody who comes down for the event. You'll get to meet us because we'll be there taping at the shows for the podcast and for the video series. So that'll be a great opportunity. You guys out there, visit museexpo.net and register now for the event. Again, it's March 22nd through the 25th in Burbank, California. And like Ritch said, it's a great opportunity and a really great event to meet people from the worldwide music industry. So visit museexpo.net.
Hi, this is DJ Groovomatic, and you're listening to the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured guest is influential music industry analyst, author, and podcast host Keith Jopling. Loved this conversation, Eric, and it's the first of its kind that we've really ever gotten into this kind of depth.
The art and study of vinyl.
Exactly, and what makes it significant is that this is the, shall we say, format or basis of what built the modern music industry.
Correct.
I mean, we all grew up with this.
Right.
You know, when our time, energy, focus, and attention was on albums.
Correct.
Both in the sense of discovery and in terms of the time of attention that we paid with music in terms of listening. You know, I mean, I know you and I have had conversations about, you know, the Zeppelin albums or the Kiss albums and studying the artwork and studying
knowing
the
all
lyrics.
the credits and knowing who did what and who produced what.
And where it was done.
And why was that attention given was because we had less outlets and it was like the only thing that we had to kind of look, who are these people? Like, you know, you were painting pictures in your head of who these people were and are. And that's all you had to look at. It wasn't like we had MTV, which is now gone. All these other outlets, it was a much smaller world.
It's the only world.
Right.
We didn't have TV. We didn't have the internet.
Right.
So your time and attention was spent on this. And this is what made the conversation interesting, is that world of building a connection with your audience via the album. And I describe an album as a body of work.
Right.
It's a body of work that we often, in the past, built the relationship with the artist, with our audience as an artist on.
Right.
You know, and it was the copy model, what I call the copy model, the cassette, the album, the you know, CD, whatever it was. It was a body of work that we spent time with.
Correct.
And today, you know, now we just access music.
Right.
And what is fascinating is how, you know, people today, as far as the album goes, it's interesting because when you look at like the difficulty in building an audience today, a difficult album, for example, might be the fourth album of an artist rather than the second, because it takes so much more time to build a meaningful following and achieve some kind of creative maturity with your audience. And also to understand, in the modern world of today, as opposed to the past, not every single artist of every single type of music is album based.
Right.
That's a very significant
point. I think another interesting point is that we're back to the way it was in the 50s and 60s, where it's singles driven now. So that's another thing that's happening on top of that. So you might have bands like in my world with rock, hard rock, and metal that are still putting out pieces like, you know, one complete piece of like 10 to 12 songs, but most people now are doing, you know, singles and putting that one out at a time. And so it's an interesting kind of thing. One of the things that I really love that he spoke about during this conversation was, Ritch, how listeners engage with albums is changing. Many younger fans only listen to albums by artists that they already have a deeper relationship with, altering how new artists break through with album releases. And I thought that was very interesting. And I think he talked about also something with Taylor Swift about how she's reintroduced that as an important piece to what's going on in her storytelling.
Absolutely. Yes, she has. And, you know, she, I think Beyonce, are two people who were really at the top of the, pop culture and music ecosystems that really have embraced what you're talking about, where the album to their audience or, body of work really matters. And, the challenge, of course, today is that I guess the significance is in the fact that the album, we don't need to buy it anymore.
Right.
Whereas we did in the past.
Right. And not only that, but you're not hearing that complete work the way that they sequenced it and the way that they wanted you to hear that, which was another big thing back in the era of rock albums. When we had Bob Ezrin talk about Pink Floyd, The Wall, that was an album experience.
Yes.
Kiss Destroyer, that was an album experience. Now it's just everything is kind of piecemealed. So it's very interesting.
Yes. And, like we were saying before, people don't listen to albums unless they already have a previous relationship with the artist.
Which is very interesting, right? Which is very interesting. And with that, insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured conversation with Keith Jopling.
Keith, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. You wrote a wonderful book, and it's called A Body of Work, An Alternative History of the Album. And the thing that was so amazing about it is that it takes us on a fascinating journey through, I guess, what you'd call the turbulent life of the album in the digital era. You talk about Napster and Spotify, and you explore why, against all odds, the album has not only survived, but remains the, I guess, ultimate artistic statement. And you've spent years studying music, culture, and the business around it. What was the spark that made you want to write Body of Work, An Alternative History of the Album? And why tell that story now?
I was actually writing a different book. I was writing the book that's based on my Art of Longevity podcast about how artists survive the music business, which is also coming out, by the way. It's going to follow this book.
Great.
But one of the themes that really struck me in putting together that book, and in fact, in all the conversations around the Art of Longevity, was all of these bands that have been around for 20, 30, 40 years who were still making really, really great albums. I'm talking about bands like Suede, the Waterboys, bands like Idlewild. I mean, just the Manic Street Preachers, a bunch of US bands I'd had on the show, Death Cab for Cutie, bands like that. And I was just so impressed that they were still sustaining this skill to make, amazing albums without any filler, with great stories behind the songs and great themes running through the songs. So I sat down to write an article about that, and one thing just led to another, and I just ended up going into hyper focus, and 3 months later I had the book, basically about 80-90% of the book.
Wow, that's it's well, I mean, we'll get into it, but that's such an interesting genesis, if you will, of an origin story.
I mean, when I started going back and revisiting my own career, which started in the year 2000 in the music business, when I took a job for the IFPI, the global trade body for the music, for the record labels. And as you know, it was the start of Napster. It was the atomization of music. We suddenly had hundreds of millions of files, and that was this beginning of the conversation about what's going to happen with this business, what's going to happen with this culture of music, and certainly, is this the beginning of the end of the album? And so I went right back to the year 2000 and went forward from there.
Keith, it's really great having you on the show. Very excited to talk to you. In your Body of Work book, you describe the album as having survived multiple deaths at the hands of technology. Why do you think that this format, more than any other, has proven so resilient against disruption?
It's really interesting because the guys who run tech, and it's just been a phenomenally successful business as we brought technology to all forms of media and all forms of everything we do. I sometimes think that what's lost in this obsession with scale, the internet can scale just about anything. We've seen that. But in doing so, it tends to fragment things into smaller chunks of what it used to be and smaller chunks of time, and this clamoring for attention. And I feel what started to happen was, this drift from the art form to content, just filling pipes with content. And we all know that's not what it's about. I mean, musicians know that that's not what it's about, and they resist that and they have a frustration with it. So for me, it was about how to pinpoint why it survived and why art always bucks the market, because you can't actually scale the appreciation of a piece of art, whether it's an album or a book or going to see a movie, and preferably in the cinema. And why is that? It's because we're human beings. We like stories. We maybe have lost the thread of that. But going back to it, it really started and still it starts and ends with artists. They wanted to continue to make albums. They understood that a great song comes from creating a bunch of songs first, and then kind of picking out the ones that are going to connect more, or just allowing people to find those songs, which is what is beautiful about streaming. It surprises artists which songs really stand out from the album now. They don't have to try and pre-plan and pick a single that's going to work. They just, whatever comes up, comes up. But, it started with the artist. I think certainly the vinyl resurgence has played a huge part in the resurgence and renaissance of the album. But young people are going back to physical experiences. They're shopping in antique stores. They're enjoying nostalgia. You're never too young to be nostalgic. And they're harking back to this time when there was a bit of decorum to it. And, I think, getting into vinyl, and even if it's CDs, it just makes you feel a little bit more of a valuable fan. And it certainly is something that the artist continues to aspire to.
Yeah, no, I agree. And its art form has evolved. I want to ask you something in the book. You describe Body of Work as both, I guess, a love letter to the album and a critique of the algorithm. What do you think the album uniquely gives listeners that streaming era playlists and singles never can? And why does that matter culturally, not just commercially?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, in this race for, I don't know, engagement, scaling everything, we went first, to the song, which is, I guess, the smallest viable unit of pop music as we know it, until now, when it became even more about the clip, and now it's about stems. And now in the AI era, we're talking about creating who knows what, the new products from music. But I mean, there is the weight of history and culture always bears down on where we are today. So again, there was a piece of another book by a great writer called David Hepworth, where he was talking about the impact of technology, starting with the CD on the album and what's happened with streaming. And his statement was that art can't buck the market. And I thought, well, that's probably the one thing in this book that I can challenge to be not true, because art continues to buck the market. We like to spend time in galleries. We like to, as I say, go and see movies. And we like to spend time listening to music in chunks, or at least the idea of it. I think what's interesting about the research I did behind the book, and everybody I talk to, they kind of fall into two camps. I like to put a record on, hit the sofa, and just listen. And at times I can be convinced I'm the last person on earth doing this. But you meet other people who do the same thing, and then you meet other people who say that's insane. How much you've got too much time on your hands. Who does that now? And I think behavior is very varied between us as music fans. But we like the idea of and the romance and the importance, the cultural importance of this format of a body of work, a bunch of songs that hold together. They have a through line, whether it's a narrative or a theme, or even just a connection of time and place. And it just makes sense. And that's how we track the careers of our favorite albums, from classic artists like Springsteen and Joni Mitchell and all of those fabulous album artists, to artists now that are on their second and third album. We start to follow that story. And we measure our life as well by our favorite albums, as much as we do songs. We remember specific albums that just are just embedded in our brain that we listen to over and over again that made more of an impact on us than any individual song. So I think it is the strength of these cultural formats that maybe just popped up out of nowhere, but stuck and continue to stick despite whatever, the next tech innovation is going to throw at us.
Yeah, you know what's so interesting? As I'm listening to you, I'm reflecting on the fact I teach courses on the music business. I have for many, many years, and I teach at Musicians Institute. And this discussion, and you just reminded me of it in your answer, this discussion about the album is something that I have with my students who range from the age of 18 to like 25. 80% of them are in that range. And I've had this discussion for many years about the album. And one of the most interesting things that I've learned about the album, and I always preface it when I ask this question, it always is true, and it's something that I've just learned about this generation of album listeners, is that they will listen to albums, they do listen to albums, but only with artists that they've already had a previous musical relationship with.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting kind of thing. And the other factor that's most interesting about albums is that the other 50% of people who buy them, and this is backed up by statistics, don't play them. They're used as merchandise, which is a fascinating evolution to your topic. It's kind of a side.
It's a collectible.
Exactly. It's a collectible. But the fact of the first point was the most interesting to me. I have asked every single class for the last 4 or 5 years that question, and it has never, ever failed to get the exact same response. Yes, I only listen to an album, or the last album that I've listened to is by somebody who I've already had a previous musical relationship with.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating kind of concept in that, I think I'm probably even older. I'm a lot older than you. And I grew up in the era of the album, in the 70s, when that was the vehicle, when you heard something and you were happy to listen to, no pun intended on your title, but you were happy to listen to a body of work based on a song that you heard. And that kind of relationship between audience and artist, or audience and format, I should say, doesn't seem to be there as much today until they have a deeper relationship with you. They're not willing to invest the time. And I thought that's a fascinating concept.
Well, yeah, I think the generation that you're talking about, for sure. First of all, they have a lot more competition for their attention, and they have less patience, and they want to cut to the chase. So it's very hard to win them over with something that effectively is going to take a lot of investment when they have an endless choice of things they can do at any given moment, right? So I understand that. I understand it completely. And I've got a sort of similar theory from the other side, from the creator side. And in fact, I tend to have guests on the art of longevity when they get to their fourth album and beyond. And my take on it is the fourth album now is a little bit like what we used to call the difficult second album.
Yeah, the sophomore jinx. Yeah.
Because you've got more strikes at it now if you're a serious artist, because you don't necessarily need to be signed to one label. There's various routes to releasing an album, and you kind of work your way up to album 3 or 4 before you even know if you're going to have a career or not. And by that time, you have grown a fan base that is more interested in the new things that you're going to put out. And so I think that kind of matches from the creator side what you're talking about from the fan side. Honestly, I put down a lot of credit in the book to Taylor Swift and a little bit to lockdown, when we all had a bit more time to reflect and to just, consume art, including albums. And, Taylor Swift puts out the album Evermore, and then she puts out the album Folklore, which are kind of a twin, a twin together in many ways. And it's very different. And again, that's a harking back to a time when artists got to a certain level in their career. Maybe it was album 3 or 4, or maybe 6 or 7, where they could take a left turn and take their fans with them, which is something that they can no longer really, they just don't have the luxury of that in today's market. It's too fast, it's too competitive. But when Taylor Swift did that, I think she did inject a lot of faith back into the artist community that you can still do that and have a lot of global success with an album. And I think, again, the people that she's influenced, and particularly it is a lot of young female artists like Billie Eilish and now Olivia Rodrigo, and they are very much back to focusing on creating an album as their next project, with the through line, the artwork, the concept behind it, paying attention to every track, playing a lot of those tracks in a live setting, and bringing the art back. So, I mean, there's definitely, I think, it'd be interesting to see where we go from here, but I definitely get that. There's just less patience, and there's much more content than there used to be back in the day.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we're bombarded constantly from the moment we wake up to the minute we go to sleep. So it's really hard to capture people's attention. I wanted to ask you, Keith, Napster atomized the album, iTunes unbundled it, and Spotify tried to shuffle it to death. Yet you write that the album resembled itself like a cyborg. Can you expand on that metaphor and what it says about the cultural endurance of the format?
Yeah. So again, this is where, imagine, we were there, right? We all saw the force of these technologies. Napster came along and, the business just lost control. When it tried to regain control with iTunes, we kind of thought that might be a model, but I think even at the time we suspected, well, this is a little weird, buying a song a time for 79 cents, reassembling your own album if you want to listen to music that way. It was kind of weird. And that was the period where a lot of artists would experiment with putting out just singles. You remember that?
Yeah.
Artists were kind of speaking against the album, saying, right, okay, we're just going to release a single a month or a single a week. Smashing Pumpkins was a great example of this. And it just never worked. People just didn't really care about that. So I thought that was an interesting time. And then with Spotify, it's just bizarre to me. And I was there, I worked there for a couple of years in strategy. And it was way after the time that they put the shuffle button on an album. And it's still, looking back at this, it was fascinating doing this research, because no one can pinpoint like when this happened or why it happened. Like, was this the deliberate decision, or did they just feel like it wasn't important? And we know it is. We know how, the artists spend 2 years of their life making an album, maybe sometimes more. They spend a lot of money making an album, and they spend a lot of time thinking about the scheduling of the tracks, what it's going to open with, what the middle of the album is going to look like. If it's 2 sides of vinyl, how is that going to play out? What's going to be the closing track? So it just seemed insane, and definitely showed a lack of respect, I think, for the art form and the industry as a partner, to not pay attention to that. And so I think the reason why it's come back is, well, Adele stepped in, for one. The whole artist community immediately agreed with her. And to be fair to Spotify, they backed down pretty quickly. But I think from that moment on, there was a little bit of, okay, we can still have a say in what happens. We, the artists and the industry, can still keep control of the business we're in and the product that we put out. And another example of that, just to pay some credit to the industry, because I also talk about the insanity of measuring album sales in the age of streaming, because it just didn't make any sense. It's like trying to measure DVD sales in the age of Netflix. And Spotify doesn't even tell the labels who's listening to albums or how many albums are listened to. The industry reconstructs all that from individual track streams. So it kind of made up album sales as a kind of proxy. But in doing that, it kept the format alive to some extent. It kept the business still circulating and revolving around this idea of the album coming out, the album cycle, promoting that piece of music, and then putting it on vinyl to sell some, which really, really helped. So I think all those forces have kind of just been, it's like a tug of war, but the point of the book is we're at a position now where actually the album is really strong. Music marketers are looking to hook their campaigns around the album. Artists are making albums. The concept album has made a bit of a comeback. I've written about that just in recent weeks. So I think the format is as strong as it ever is. And I think as a result, we are actually seeing some real classics again being made in the same way they used to be made. You know, it's like 8 to 12 tracks, a very strong theme, visually very powerful, because, you know, that's part of vinyl culture. It's also part of Instagram culture to have strong visuals out there. So it's definitely back, and I'm excited about its future.
Hey, insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured conversation. Stay tuned because we've got so much value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. Hey there, insiders. Are you dreaming of making it big as a musician, artist, or industry pro? Well, at MUBUTV, we offer personalized coaching to help you turn that dream into reality.
Think of us as your personal guides, helping you polish your songs, craft your story, find your fans, and grow your social media like a pro.
No matter where you are in your journey, we've got the tools and strategies to take you higher. From live gigs to branding and marketing, our coaching is all about you.
Choose what fits your budget, from single sessions to value-packed bundles.
Start with a free 15-minute discovery call today at book.mubutv.com. Your music career is waiting. Remember why you started making music? That feeling of passion, hope, and longing, wanting someone to hear your story?
But chasing success can be confusing. Who do you reach out to? When? How do you avoid mistakes that could close doors?
At MUBUTV, we believe every artist deserves a clear path forward. That's why we've created 3 free guides that cover the essential skills every musician needs.
How to contact A&R executives with confidence. How to attract an artist manager who gets you. How to pitch your music for film and television placements.
These aren't just tips. They're blueprints designed for artists who want more than just dreams. They want results.
If you're listening right now on this podcast or watching on YouTube, look in the description below. Download these free guides that will change how you approach your music career forever.
Don't wait. Your future fans are waiting.
This is Louis Posen, founder and president of Hopeless Records. Are you an insider? I am. Subscribe now.
You know, I want to continue on this theme for a bit with you, Keith. In the book, you make the case that the CD, bloated the album, while streaming stripped it down. Do you think we've arrived at a healthier balance today, or are albums still at the mercy of platform economics?
Yeah, I think we've arrived at a healthier balance. I mean, it's amazing to me that we are back at this point when artists are kind of spending a chunk of their life making and putting out this themed project of 8 to 12 tracks. Now, there's a lot more around it. There's, as we see with albums now, you don't have to wait too long before you get the next version. You get some B-sides, you get the deeper cuts, you get acoustic versions, you get somebody remixing it here and there. We're going to get AI versions. We're going to get the laid-back version of albums, the chill-out versions. We're going to be able to hear all kinds of varieties of that one central piece of work, but they're still focusing on that one central project being the focus of their year, or the focus of the next 2 years, and the focus of the tour. And, all of their collaborative work with, the band, the producer, all of those kind of heroes really that go into collaborating on a project. So, I mean, that to me it seems as solid as ever. And so streaming has, of course, created more and more content, but it's in a totally different way to the CD. I mean, the CD was really just a case of being able to almost double the size of what was a neat and tidy format overnight, and then therefore, just piling in just too many songs, not having the sequence right, making records quickly because, when it was boom time, you could put a record out and you kind of knew. I mean, and many artists have admitted since that, we should have cut it down. We should have left this track off or that track off, or we should have produced it differently. a lot of mistakes were made back in that CD era that I feel have been corrected now. And there's a little bit more care going into the process of making a record now. It's a special thing. And you're putting this record out at a time when, I mean, making a record, making an album is hard. I know it's hard. All the conversations I've had with artists tell me it's hard, but it's a hell of a lot harder to get people to listen to it. So, you've got to put as much effort around that as you have of making the record. And I think that's what keeps the format pretty special in this day and age.
So you see the trend, or the pendulum, I should say, swinging back from a singles driven model back to the album?
A little bit. I mean, what you said earlier is very true. There's still a whole generation of people of all ages. It's not just, under 35s or Gen Zs or whatever. People of all ages are happy with single songs. They're happy with playlists. Albums was maybe part of their culture growing up and they've left it behind. But what's interesting is that a lot of young people are moving towards albums, influenced by just realizing that there's more to being a fan. There's more to their relationship with artists. There's an interest in nostalgia for sure. And there's an influence of culture. I mean, Netflix is very influential on popular culture. We know that. If you look at any show, I talk about this in the book, and I picked out shows from certain seasons, from Euphoria to Stranger Things, and it just keeps on going now. Any show where you are being shown music and someone putting music on, it's vinyl, it's a turntable, So I think even when the kids are buying albums, as I witnessed in record shops when I've kind of been out on scouting missions, they're buying albums and they haven't got a player yet, but they're aspiring to it, and that's the thing. It's an aspirational format, I think, for the consumer as much as the artist.
Yeah, I agree totally. Keith, you write about how algorithms flatten difference and preference, creating a culture of sameness. Do you think that we're losing musical subcultures and regional identities as a result? And if so, how do artists or labels resist that drift?
Well, this is really interesting. And what do you call regional subcultures? There's a conversation here in the UK right now. We just had something called the Mercury Music Prize, which is an album prize. It's an album of the year. So it's kind of an old throwback and it's a judging panel. It's not a public vote. So it is a throwback format. But again, it's had a good year. It was a fantastic event just this week in Newcastle. Sam Fender won the prize, but the lineup of albums on there was absolutely superb. From bands that are going huge in the UK, but we would have expected those bands back in the 90s, say, in the days of Oasis and Britpop and all of that, to have already made it across the water to the USA, that they haven't gone anywhere. So that's kind of interesting. There is a huge global surfacing of new kinds of music from Latin America. The Bad Bunny phenomenon that you've seen, and we've had a touch of that over here, is phenomenal. And he's an album artist, like, through and through. That's fantastic. I think getting new artists coming up from the south of Asia. We've had K-pop coming over. We've got this kind of clash of international music that's surfacing on streaming and through the song, maybe more than the album, that we never had before. And so, UK rock, for example, classic rock, has kind of been squashed a little bit underground. And we've had post-punk and indie rock has been really thriving in the UK regionally. But again, that's become regional scenes. The thing is, these scenes are discovered on streaming as well. So in a way, because there's more of everything, and the whole thing has been scaled beyond anywhere we were before the streaming age, you can still, as I think as a band and as marketers, you can still work with that. You can still figure out where your fans are gathering, where bands of similar, your peers, where they're popping, where they're doing well, why they're doing well. You can sort of sit back and use it to your favor. And this is what I say to all artists to try and do is don't feel like you're a slave to the platforms and the algorithms by making music and then hoping that they tag it in some way or it gets playlisted and then you can have success. You've got to use this stuff and put yourself in the center of it. You just created something you love. You did it for a reason. You want it to connect with an audience and you feel it's good enough to do that. So look around you, start to use the tools that are there to actually promote this record in a way that's left of field that you couldn't have done back in the day when it was just a formula. Just get it on the radio, go and tour it. There's many, many different ways now that you can hit success and find an audience with a project. So go and do that and put yourself at the center of it. The artist is the only thing that's a bigger brand than Spotify, and you just have to use that.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you were speaking, I was thinking of a specific aspect that I want to ask you about because it's very seldom talked about, and you kind of touched on the periphery of several of the elements that I guess made that happen in album culture, which is before streaming, albums often grew slowly. Through radio, word of mouth, like you've mentioned, and live shows. Do you think that I guess what we'd call slower cultural metabolism is necessary for timeless art to emerge?
Yeah, I think you've touched on something that I think is still a big problem because, I honestly think this year, I can't keep up with the number of really, really cool albums that I've heard that I would love to hear more of.
No one can.
Neither can we.
No one can. Yeah, that's
fine,
impossible.
right?
We used to be able to. People that like yourself, and I mean, if you were in the business, you were able to do that. That's an impossibility today.
It is. It's an impossibility. I mean, I was listening to this album by BC Camplight. I think it's called A Sober Conversation. I discovered it quite late. It's like a musical end to end. And so the immediate question I have is I played it a couple of times and I love it. How many times am I going to be able to listen to this? Because the habit that you can easily get into, even if you still love albums and you don't buy them on vinyl, or even if you do, you might just listen to it once. And then you got to let it go because there's all this waterfall is still coming at you the whole time. So I think we have to be disciplined about it. It's just that simple. I mean, you have to put aside, you can filter a lot of stuff, but then you have to put it to one side. If you buy the vinyl, I mean, I tend to just I put some time aside to really listen. If my girls are out one evening, I don't want to veg out to a Netflix box set. I'll put 3 or 4 albums on, and I'll make sure if I buy a new vinyl that I play that record at least 3 or 4 times. And then something happens. Then it kicks in. You want the familiarity. Maybe you want the comfort. The mood it's going to put you in, and you want to discover more things about that one record that you're hearing all of the time. Each time you listen to it, you're hearing something new. So that's when it kicks in. But it takes discipline to get to that level with a record these days. And again, the flip side is, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter whether you are BC Camplight putting out your 3rd or 4th record, or whether you're Bruce putting out your 30th record. And, you might have spent $500,000 making it. It just evaporates. It just evaporates into what I call the ozone layer of music streaming. The hundreds of millions of songs. So, albums are just gone too quickly now. You're absolutely right. So I think that's an interesting challenge for the industry. I've got a thing about with the Mercury Prize or the Grammys and things like this, they should focus on the idea of the modern classic, because a lot of these records being made now are classics, but we're not giving them the time to become classics. And we've got to do something proactive about that to change that.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I see this the same way that I look at social media. like the stock market crash, there's going to be a social media crash. And I feel like the same thing with music. 150,000 songs being uploaded to DSPs every day. I mean, at what point does that stop? Or, you know, there's just no end in sight. So I see all of these things having that stock market crash moment. When is it going to happen? I don't know, but I just see that occurring because it's just too much. And like you said, it's not giving a chance for it to breathe into those classic albums or classic records that you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it starts with, it's like the environment. It starts with individual behavior. So for me, and this is, a theme in the book, is it does take that discipline to just go, right, okay, I just need to shut off a lot of this stuff that's being thrown at me. If I want to, when I'm playing a record, if I'm commuting in to work that day, I'll look out the window rather than kind of trying to multitask. Or if you're playing a record at home, put the phone in a different room. I mean, there's some really interesting things that have come back along with this trend with music itself, I think, going up a level in the culture at the moment. I think music is kind of back up to a place that it hasn't been for a long time. There's a few things going on with that. You can get out and listen to albums at listening parties. You might even arrange a listening party with friends. I mean, in the UK, we've got something called Classic Album Sundays. There's a thing called Pitch Black Playback. You go along, you listen to an album start to finish on a beautiful sound system in the dark. I mean, Japan has music bars. It's had a music bars culture going back to the 50s. It's got that very aesthetic culture in Japan. Some of that is coming over to the US and to Europe as well. So it sort of starts with individual ideas, I think, from music fans, and the industry needs to get behind this stuff again to kind of fight off the commodification that comes with just so much tech and content. And it's only going to get worse, right?
Yeah.
I mean, AI, it's only going to be more.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just going to say.
There's more of what we don't need.
Yeah, exactly. You're thinking of platforms like Suno that have you been seeing. I'm sure you've been seeing it on your Facebook feeds and bombarding everywhere. If you think it's bad now with this Suno coming out, talk about the Pandora's box being unleashed. It's just unreal. I wanted to ask you, Keith, in the book, you highlight that artists consistently say a classic album matters more than a hit single for legacy. And we kind of touched on that. Do you think younger generations of artists still share this view, or is the definition of legacy shifting?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I was very inspired by what Jack Antonoff said about the album on TikTok. And I put it in the intro of the book. I mean, when I was writing the book, someone pointed it out to me. I didn't discover, I don't really use TikTok that much, so I didn't come across it. But, there's a young-ish producer working with very young artists talking about the album is God. But there hasn't been an important artist in the history of music, including now, that hasn't been an album artist. That's very interesting to me. We had a phenomenal record here last summer, Brat by Charlie
XCX. Yep.
Yeah, and it's Charlie XCX has been making albums almost 15 years. I think this was her fourth or fifth record. I don't know what the count is, but she's been going for a long time. She put a lot of thought and strategy into making an album. She kind of wanted to make a modern classic, which it is. Yeah, it's not anything like Rumors, but it is the Rumors in its own way. So I think the more artists and successes we have like that, and the more stories behind it. So again, she was very vocal coming onto TikTok and platforms to say, this wasn't an accident. This has been the last 2 years' work for me. And I think people are starting to get that. So I think the more the merrier on that score, because we do have to, again, just take it upon ourselves if we want to kind of appreciate music and what it is to, I don't know, listen better, I guess.
Yeah, precisely. Keith, I want to shift gears here for a minute. Throughout your life, have there been any books, films, or documentaries that have been particularly inspiring to you that you could share with our audience?
Well, I mean, I can tell. I mean, the age of music, I think one of the reasons why I say kind of music is back in the culture is a lot of music is coming back into film. And I'm really, really enjoying this whole period of artists wanting to make films. I remember it was a couple of years ago, I was in the offices of the head of Universal in the UK, and I mentioned this trend to him, and he said, look, I've got 50 artists queuing outside wanting to make a film. And to me, that's a really great thing. I really, really enjoyed the Led Zeppelin film that was out last year. That, again, just was helpful research for the book, because it kind of makes you really understand what a miracle it is for a band to even come together in the first place. And I still think that applies to a lot of new bands right now. So, you need to find 3 or 4 people who play different instruments, have different talents. They have to come together at one time. They have to agree on making some form of music. And it's hard for 3 or 4 people to agree on an art form. They have to get together, practice sometimes for a year before they can make a record. And then they've got to write those songs, make an album, and then get it heard. I mean, to me, that's a miracle. So that film and many others like it have kind of reminded me that's the case. And that's, again, something that we should maybe appreciate a little bit beyond just firing up your phone and pressing play.
Yeah, no, definitely. Keith, your life in music has been one long conversation between art, music, culture, and the artists who create it. I'm curious, what advice, wisdom, or inspiration can you offer artists and future industry professionals who are committed to building careers for themselves in music today?
Oh, my God. I mean, I asked this question of most guests on The Art of Longevity who are successful musicians and have ridden the roller coaster and still surviving and thriving today. And they can never answer the question beyond sticking to your guns and really being careful of the distractions. So I get a few young musicians reaching out to me based on what they read or maybe listening to the podcast, which is great, because that is my equivalent of what artists say when they say, oh, that's the song we played at the wedding or whatever, And I met a young artist, a London artist. He was working hard on his first album. He's made an EP, spent a lot of money on it, written some really, really great songs. His name is Isaac Stewart. He won't mind me sharing this story. And he said, I want to make my first album about London, because he's already written a few really, really great songs about London. But, that's kind of a brave thing to do. You're putting your first album out and you're kind of making it a concept album about London. I just said to him, look, you've written 2 or 3 great songs about the city. This is where you live. You have something to say about it. You can tell new stories about it from the artist's point of view, and you can write songs. Do it. Just believe in the strength of your own ideas. Don't get too distracted. Definitely listen to people, but stick to your guns. I think that is the only advice I can give, to be honest.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. It's a journey, it's a life. Let me ask you, Keith, what is the best way for people to reach you? Is it through your website? Is it through the socials? Which way works for you?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I still run the Song Sommelier website. It used to be my playlist site. So, ironically, the start of my kind of album journey with this book kind of goes back a few years in my life. Started after I'd been making playlists for 2 years and I hadn't listened to an album for 2 years. It's still there, and it now hosts all of the creative work I do. So it's got the Art of Longevity podcast on there. It's got body of work on there. It has the roller coaster book that's coming on there. And there's a contact page on there, or you could just hit me up on LinkedIn or Instagram. And again, a lot of the profile stuff on socials is under the Song Sommelier.
Wonderful.
Great.
We cannot thank you enough for taking the time to do this. Really, really grateful to you. This has been a wonderful, insightful, and thoroughly enjoyable conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Of course. Thank you, Keith.
I'll see you soon.
You know, Eric, this was a really, really interesting conversation for a couple reasons. One, we never talk about albums anymore.
Right.
And I don't mean just on this show. I mean in the culture.
Right.
For the most part, we don't, because music isn't consumed that way. People still make albums.
Right.
We still listen. But what's fascinating is, you know, and I think we talked about this at the top of the show, is what makes someone, and I'm not talking about people who grew up on them, but what makes a new young listener listen to an album is entirely something different than what makes somebody, you know, my age or our age listen to an album, which is a relationship that we have with the artist.
Right.
That's the difference. We would willingly listen to music in an album to develop that relationship without giving it a second thought. Generation of today won't do that.
Yeah, it was more of a discovery thing back then. You would see an album cover and I go, I'm fascinated by that. What is this? Let me buy it.
That's right. That's right. And AOR played a very big part of that. It was much more of a centralized kind of introduction. But now what we're seeing, you know, and I remember asking you about this, you know, the slower cultural metabolism that was necessary for timeless albums. I mean, you know, when you think of like, you know, Who's Next, or you think of, you know, Destroyer, or you think of Physical Graffiti, these are albums that have had decades
right
to ingest into the cultural metabolism
of
of
the culture, yeah,
of our own.
And it was a different time back then. So
that's right, and it's had time to. So what I wondered, and you know what I thought was most interesting about the conversation is how, you know, he said that's something, you know, I remember he said, I think you've touched on something there that is still a very big problem. I can't keep up with the number of really, really cool albums that I've heard. You know, I'd love to hear more of, you know, it's that habit. And that's the key word, you know, the habit.
Right.
You know, and we spent time as a habit. You know, we spoke about like the ritual of, you know, taking the plastic off, opening it up,
right.
You know, taking the vinyl up, putting it on, sitting with it. Looking at the lyrics, looking at the images,
right.
Reading the credits.
You had bigger pictures to look at, too.
Yes.
That was another thing, too. You had these huge, you know, the vinyl album was big.
We had a ritual.
Correct.
Or a habit, or however you wanted to call it. And, you know, today, I think that still exists, but on a much, much smaller scale. And it'd be interesting to look at people who are doing that or who are younger. They're only doing it with people who they already have a musical relationship with.
But I think there's still a connection there, that there's the audio file in them, that they somehow are connected. And it's a certain population of the people that are vinyl fans, whether you grew up with it or not. That are,
sure.
So there's definitely some kind of connection there to that. And I just don't know what that is. But one of the things that I love that he talked about was about what does the album format give listeners that playlist and singles cannot. And, you know, and I quote, we like the idea, the romance and the importance, the cultural importance of this format of a body of work, a bunch of songs that hold together. They have a through line, whether it's a narrative or a theme, or even just a connection of a time and place. That's how we track careers of our favorite albums. We measure our life as well by our favorite albums, as much as we do songs. The strength of these cultural formats stuck and continue to stick despite whatever, you know, the next tech innovation is going to throw at us. I mean, how many times do you think of an album? I mean, that's one of the strongest things to me that music does to you, that it puts you in a place and time in your life or time in the culture. I mean, I think about the albums that, you know, I grew up listening to. Kiss Alive 2 was like a pivotal, you know, moment for me. You know, Rush, Moving Pictures, you know, on and on and on. When I think about these moments, you know, Radiohead, OK Computer, that was a landmark seminal album as the format started to die more and more. So you kind of think about that, and it's a very interesting kind of thing that I think is really pertinent today in our conversation.
Yeah, it's an interesting element that you bring up, Eric. And to your point, one of the things that he talked about, if you remember, which I thought was really fascinating, is that we have to give time and attention. He spoke about how they have like listening bars in Japan.
Right.
And Japan's the second largest music market in the world.
Right.
You know, so there's something there about that. So it's kind of on us, the individual and the album lover, to be able to give time and energy to listening, to spending that time. I mean, I'm trying to think of like the last time that I actually spent listening to a new album that I went out and bought. I mean, it's been a while. I'd have to really give that some thought, where I, read the credits and all of that. I sort of all take it for granted now.
Right.
I still listen to albums and new things when they come
Correct.
out. But
not in the same way that we were consuming it before.
No, because I'm at a different station of life,
Right.
and it's a different level of consumption. But it's to his point, which is that in order for this to survive, we have to, we are part of that process.
Right.
It's not all going to be done for us.
Right.
So, a lot of really, really fascinating aspects to this. So, to get music to a place where it's not just background, but it's something that's more significant and contributing to your, I guess, cultural and musical life.
Hey, Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at mubutv.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes and our space. You can also find us at social media at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter X, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Music Business Insider video series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.